Friends, thanks very much for that. I want to warmly welcome everyone here today. The last time we met like this was in 2019, and we didn't think it was going to take this long to get back into a room together again, so it feels very good. I also want to warmly welcome all those watching at home. We believe in the potential and desire for change in Ireland, and we think it's huge. But people want genuine change, not a repackaging of stale parties or policies as something new. Even Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who've shared power for the last 100 years, claim to lead a change agenda. So what makes the Social Democrats any different? What does social democratic change look like? It can be summarised by one familiar phrase, Ní neart go cur le chéile. There is no strength without unity. Social democracy at its core is about human dignity, protecting those fundamental elements that provide every member of society with dignity and opportunity. Things like housing, healthcare should never be mere commodities, only available to those on the highest incomes. This is why the state must play its role, an active role consistently and decisively. But for too long, the state has outsourced its responsibilities to the private market.
This generation of young people will be the first who will be worse off than their parents. Housing costs are out of control, childcare costs are the equivalent of a mortgage, and energy prices are skyrocketing. Interest rate hikes on mortgages in the coming months will add further to the squeeze on families. Inflation is now at 7.8%, a 38-year high. It does not impact everybody equally. Those on low and middle incomes spend a disproportionate amount of their income on necessities, and people are increasingly going into debt to pay for those necessities, and more people are at serious risk of poverty. We must therefore target measures at those who need them most, and we need to take action with an emergency budget now. The Social Democrats would put €300 into the pockets of workers earning up to €50,000 using a refundable tax credit. Create a hardship fund so that those most at risk of food and fuel poverty can access emergency payments immediately. And increase the social welfare rates, like pensions, social welfare rates right across the board, by €10 a week, as social welfare rates have only increased by €5 in total over the last 3 years. And in our alternative budget in October, we'll be proposing other measures. Childcare must be transformed so that it is publicly funded, the only way that costs will come down. Primary and secondary education must be genuinely free, and third-level fees, which are the highest in the EU, must be cut. Crucially, workers should not have such a struggle just to get by. They need a living wage. Workers must also have security of employment, the right to collective bargaining, and the right to flexible work options. Our small and medium businesses, our main employers, must be supported. We know that corporation tax receipts are volatile, so we must do more to grow our indigenous businesses. There have been winners as well as losers from this crisis. Energy companies have been profiteering on the backs of ordinary people. We can and must act to stop that from happening with the introduction of a windfall tax. The state has also benefited, of course. VAT receipts are surging, in part due to the increased energy costs. VAT and excise duty, which have been decreased recently, those charges on energy and fuel costs are due to expire in October. They must be extended into next year, and there must be further excise duty cuts.
One of the most basic requirements in a functioning society is the provision of secure and affordable housing. It's supposedly the biggest priority for government, but it's its biggest failure. In previous decades, single-income families with one worker on an average wage could aspire to lead a decent life. They may not have been rich, but many owned their own home, they could educate their children, and they had a secure job. Today, single people are forced to continue to live at home. They house share, rent tiny apartments at exorbitant costs until they're in their 30s, 40s, and even older. Older people worry about where they live when they retire and how they'll pay for it. Even couples on what were once considered decent wages are locked out of home ownership. Many are again considering emigration. This is not just about bricks and mortar. The price of the housing crisis is paid by the thousands of children losing childhoods as they grow up in emergency accommodation, by the relationships that break down because of the stress of housing insecurity, by the couples who postpone a family, and by the disconnected communities that result when people are unable to put down roots. What kind of a society are we building when affordability is defined by government as being €450,000 in Dublin, 400,000 in Cork or Galway? Do they know a mortgage at these amounts requires incomes of at least 114,000? Like, what planet are they on? At the heart of the housing crisis is an affordability crisis. The government should be doing everything that it can to drive down prices so that people on average incomes can aspire again to own their own homes. Instead of pursuing policies that inflate house prices even further, throwing money and tax breaks at private developers and vulture funds is not just wrong, it's wasteful and it's not working. Nearly a decade into the crisis, we need radical action because there are solutions. We must immediately introduce a tax and bring the 90,000 vacant homes across the country back into use. We must end the greed of land speculation, a major driver of housing costs, by finally controlling the cost of development land. And if that takes a referendum, well, let's have it. We must end the favourable tax treatment of REITs and vulture funds. We must regulate short-term letting platforms like Airbnb, which are cannibalising the rental market. And we must introduce a 3-year ban on rent increases to improve security for renters.
We currently spend more than €22 billion on our health service, but it's in a state of perpetual crisis. A quarter of our population, 1.3 million people, are now on waiting lists for healthcare. A truly shocking figure. It's becoming more and more difficult to retain our excellent healthcare workers in a system that fails them too. For too long, the Irish people have endured a situation in which healthcare has been delayed, deferred, and sometimes denied. Sláintecare can change that. It was designed to take the political wrangling out of health. That was 5 years ago. Even before the pandemic, the progress on implementing it was minimal. Why is there such resistance to reform? Who stands to benefit? Because it's not the Irish people. The Sláintecare plan is not actually radical. It sets out a blueprint to bring the Irish health service into line with almost every other EU country, free at the point of delivery. People can attend the doctor, a speech and language therapist. They can access mental health services, access home care when they need it, without worrying about the cost. If that sounds revolutionary, it shouldn't. Ireland's current 2-tier model of healthcare is an outlier, not an exemplar. Better health outcomes and lower healthcare costs will only come after we reform the system. And to be clear, the full implementation of Sláinte Care in the term of the next government will be a red line for our participation in that government. We also make another commitment today. The Social Democrats will never gift valuable public infrastructure like a €1 billion new national maternity hospital. We will never gift it to a private company, be that religious or otherwise. It will never happen, not on our watch. You can count on that.
Disability supports, which are vital to help disabled people to live full lives, are fragmented and threadbare. It's not acceptable for the government to blame recruitment problems for the failure to provide essential services. If services were properly planned and prioritised, then critical staff would be in place. Children with disabilities and their families must battle from the day they're born. It's shameful that their biggest battle is often with the state to try and get basic services like an assessment of need, essential therapies or a school place. This abject neglect has disastrous consequences. Children's development is limited and they're prevented from reaching their full potential. Once children turn 18, whatever meagre supports that do exist often disappear. We need a government that pays more than lip service to the rights of disabled people. In our first month in office, the Social Democrats in government would sign the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Which allows disabled people make complaints directly to the UN when the state fails to provide their services.
We have just 8 years to stop the worst impacts of the climate crisis, an irreversible climate catastrophe. The challenge is immense, and it seems like we're being set up to fail. Our emissions are going up, not down. If we want to meet our targets, large-scale structural changes are urgently required that only the state can make. Changes like restricting the development of new data centres, facilitating the speedy development of offshore wind energy, incentivising sustainable farming, investing in major public transport infrastructure, and introducing retrofitting, a scheme that is actually affordable for the people who need it most. These are all measures that only the state can make in relation to intervention. They must intervene, and the Social Democrats in government would prioritise them. At the core of our climate policy must be climate justice, the assurance that those least able to afford the transition to a zero-carbon economy will not bear the heaviest burden. This commitment must be more than hollow words. It must be enshrined in law. If we commit to climate action, it will be transformative. It will lead to new employment opportunities, warmer homes, cleaner air and water, more sustainable farming, more livable cities and towns, and a better quality of life for everyone. We must get this right. The alternative is unthinkable, and time is running out. The war in Ukraine has underlined our energy insecurity and the urgent need to ramp up investment in renewable energy production. We in the Social Democrats want to again make clear our revulsion at Russia's illegal war. Putin's dangerous despotism is a threat not just to Ukraine, but to the world. We stand with Ukraine now and into the future. There have been some who've used the war in Ukraine as a pretext for abandoning or diluting our long-held position of neutrality. That would be a mistake. Ireland, as a neutral country, has never been an aggressor nor an oppressor on the world stage. Our role has always been as peacekeepers and peacemakers. This is where our strength lies, and our neutrality is the foundation stone which anchors it.
We have seen the devastation and destruction that was caused by conflict on our own island. We cannot allow the Good Friday Agreement, which put an end to that violence, to be endangered by unilateral decisions taken by a minority of partisan politicians. The DUP cannot continue to hold the region to ransom. The power-sharing institutions in Northern Ireland must be allowed to function. And the British government can't rip up international agreements and use the threat of political instability in the north as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the EU. Its approach is tawdry, short-sighted, and it's dangerous. Friends, in much of Irish politics and Irish public life, we see the corrosive politics of the golden circle, a fast track for insiders whose connections confer an unfair advantage. Civil and public service pay rates have been spectacularly breached in the hiring process for individual senior staff. High-profile jobs have been awarded to friends and colleagues of government ministers in the absence of an open recruitment process. Appointments to state boards and institutions are still made by party political allies, while important state projects routinely go massively over budget. In scandal after scandal, the same culprit is identified: systems failure. Usually after a lengthy and expensive review or inquiry, conveniently, systems can't be sacked, demoted, jailed, or otherwise censured. So as long as there are no consequences for failure, there is no real incentive for reform. We need accountability in every facet of Irish public life: the government, the public service, and the corporate world. We will only get change if we properly protect whistleblowers and make legal accountability a term and condition of employment in the public and civil service. But we must go further. We need an independent anti-corruption agency with the remit and resources to provide meaningful regulation and oversight of our institutions. We must In short, we must have a state watchdog with real teeth.
We saw in recent years the best of what our society is capable of, the outpouring of support, empathy, and solidarity as we faced unimaginable difficulties. Having seen what is possible, we cannot go back to business as usual. We must think about the society we want to see, not just in the immediate future, but in 10, 20, and 30 years' time, because the decisions that we take today will shape that future. We set up the Social Democrats in 2015 to provide people with a real choice about what that future will look like. The Social Democrats is a party for a new era, not defined by old loyalties old politics, old policies, cosy business connections, or jobs for the boys. We stand for change. We stand for equality. We stand for accountability, a better type of politics. By doing things differently, by making social democratic change, we can achieve a much better Ireland for all. Thank you very much.